I'm Stephen Foskett. I'm the organizer of Tech Field Day, and we're here in San Francisco at Intel Cloud Day. We're looking at some of the products and technologies that Intel announced and discussed today, and this time we're focusing on networking. And so we have a panel of networking experts here around the table, and we're going to just discuss what we think of Intel's network telemetry and automation. So let's start by introducing ourselves. You want to say?
My name is John Welsh. I'm a solutions architect. You can find me on Twitter at Sample5, and my blog is sample5.com.
My name is Ryan Booth. I blog at blog.movingonesandzeros.net. I am on Twitter at thatoneguy_15, and I am in route switch and data center networking.
My name's Tom Hollingsworth. I'm a networking blogger and speaker. You can find me on Twitter as @networkingnerd, and you can find my blog at networkingnerd.net.
I'm Drew Conway-Murray. I'm content director at Packet Pushers. You can find me on Twitter at Drew_CM, and you can read my blog on packetpushers.net.
And I'm Matt Oswald. I blog at keepingitclassless.net, and I'm on Twitter at Mearden.
All right. Well, one of the things that you were very interested in is this concept of network telemetry. Mm-hmm. We did a Tech Field Day roundtable on network telemetry in the fall, talked with some of the companies in the space that are doing some pioneering work there, and now Intel is here talking about it as well. Do you want to give us a little introduction to that?
Sure. Yeah, so just generally the concept of network telemetry and we'll call it network monitoring, that's sort of what we're talking about, just sort of like next gen, is a hot topic right now. I think it's going to be a lot hotter even in the next 5 to 10 years. To your point, we had a roundtable earlier, I think it was earlier this year or maybe late last year, on this idea of streaming telemetry instead of a pull model, right? We're not asking our network how healthy it is. We're having it stream that information to us. And not only that, the way that we receive that data is much more open and flexible instead of locked to a specific set of vendor, platform models. So one of the things that I find interesting that Intel's been talking about is a framework called Snap. They open sourced this late last year. It essentially is a way to, in a distributed capacity, gather telemetry information about everything about your infrastructure. I know that a lot of metrics from a Linux host perspective, it's gathering all kinds of interesting statistics there, maybe pulling the Docker daemon to see how the containers are performing, things of that nature. From a networking perspective, I think this is really interesting, and I'm sure that there's more to come with that open source project from a networking perspective. My question to you guys is how does this new model, which includes Snap, but also includes the work that companies like Netflix talked about at the Data Field Day Roundtable. I know Cisco's done some work in this space. Google has introduced gRPC for streaming anything, but they're using gRPC from a network telemetry perspective. What do you guys think about all that? Is that something that the industry as a whole needs, or maybe just some of the top networks?
I think it's an industry need. Mm-hmm. I think S&MP had a good run, but it's starting to show its age. I mean, even 10 years ago in my career, I was starting to run into issues where one of the tools we were using, we fed it 4,000 ports, and the tool just barfed. And when we went to the developers and said, hey, we tried to pull this much data and it didn't work, the response back we got was, why would you ever want to look at that many ports at once? And now look at, networks are 10 or 100 times bigger, yeah. And all of that telemetry data is absolutely critical to the operation, because when a port goes down for 4 seconds, that's a dollar value in a private cloud. In a public cloud, I mean, we've seen that when Amazon goes down. Somebody does a bad switch upgrade on US East, and all of a sudden Netflix goes down. It has unintended consequences. So yeah, I absolutely think that's got to happen.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this whole evolution that grabbed me originally at the roundtable that we were talking about is the difference between the Matt from Netflix brought up these two examples where you have Cacti on one hand, then you have a tool like Grafana, or I think he brought up something else. Essentially, this new model of I'm no longer saying I want to grab data from this switch and I'm going to retrieve this very specific thing from this very specific MIB. Rather than that, I just want you to stream telemetry data in the format you feel is appropriate in an open standard like JSON or something like that, and it's up to me to interpret that. I think that's definitely sort of turns the model on its head. And I think the framework Snap from Intel, it definitely is along those lines where it's saying I don't necessarily want to force you to visualize your data in a certain way. I'm going to integrate with companies or tools like Grafana. I can't remember the company behind Grafana. and I'm not going to hold you to a certain way of monitoring your infrastructure. I think that's huge.
It's necessary because of the way technology shifts now. So if I want to monitor a new device that I bought, I have to wait for the manufacturer to create a MIB for that device. I have to wait for my NMS to get an update to understand that MIB. Wouldn't it just be easier to bring the new device online, click a couple of boxes, or send it a command line that says, stream all of the data that you have to this collector, and the collector then gets JSON that says, okay, well, this is CPU utilization and blah, 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 blah. And I don't understand this field, but thankfully it gave me a description, so I know that I need to put this somewhere. Because the network has a treasure trove of data that we haven't ever been able to access, and we have to know that now.
But once we can start pulling all this data, it sounds like we're also going to need tool sets that can actually use it and make some sense out of it, because just getting more data isn't necessarily going to help you. And
Absolutely.
And I like what they said this morning is that data without visualization is just a bunch of numbers. And that goes very much to that point where if all you have is looking at this data, you're going to be lost.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have looked at it, but like Elk Stack, right? You have all of these different tools, Kibana, Logstash, and all of that. These, sysadmins have been using these tools to dump streams of data from essentially logs, right? And sort of what we're talking about is network analytics and network metrics as logs is sort of what we're talking about with the push model. I think that's very interesting. Those tools have really interesting ways for you to morph and match on that data that I think we've needed for a long time in networking. As opposed to, again, with SNMP, you want to monitor this very specific thing, and you have to find it first, and it's very platform specific, and it's cumbersome. And this is a lot less so, I think.
Two things for me that I'm excited about with how this stuff is evolving is you get deeper and deeper and more visibility into what you're trying to look at. Whereas in the past, we've always just had to guess, or we work off of what we have, or NetFlow, things like that. So you get better data, you actually see deeper. The flips, or the other side of that for me, is like you mentioned, it's a push model. So you're as close to real time as you can with that type of stuff, which that can go multiple ways. You can watch live streams, see what's going on, see what's causing your packets. Or a next step, which way pie in the sky, is integrate that into our controller. Now if we start seeing these type of patterns or these type of signatures, let's shift our data from New York and over to Chicago while we figure out what's going on in New York. Things like that, I can see that becoming possible.
And it's really important because as we've evolved from things like SNMP to NetFlow and then eventually back to telemetry streaming, we have to make sure that the collectors can send the data but not overwhelm the frameworks that we're using to collect it. Facebook tells a story of NetFlow collectors on their servers just absolutely destroying the NetFlow collectors back where they were supposed to be, and then they had to go through a whole bunch of rewrite. Now, granted, Facebook's data center is not your data center, but if you're running a huge cloud deployment, you could conceivably cause problems unless frameworks like Snap are capable of handling it.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, so now you have to then build out, like a lot of people are doing, you have to build out a separate monitoring infrastructure. So you got two infrastructures inside your data center.
I think it depends on the constraint, right? Anytime you make a change to an application, you're typically doing it as a result of a constraint that you've placed on it in a previous design, right? And when I look at monitoring systems like this, you could very easily overwhelm like a collector or something like that. Examples like the Netflix talk from earlier, last year, they went into a lot of detail actually on some of the trade-offs they had to make for some of their telemetry data. Users wanted to know all of this stuff. That's fine. If you want all of that data, I'll give it to you, but you might need to wait maybe a couple seconds. So everything's about trade-offs. I don't think we're going to get to a point where this is just infeasible. I think we're just going to have to be okay with maybe a slightly delayed, slightly less than real time model.
Well, or that might even be another solution for, you got your top of rack switches now that are starting to introduce Docker and containerization with inside of it. So why not just force feed all this information up to your top of rack switch? Let the container up there be an agent, turn around, parse it how it needs to parse it, and then shoot it to a pair of central controllers.
I think Intel would prefer that you had a really nice
Yeah.
big central controller.
44 cores.
No, but I see what you're saying. I mean, actually, to be honest, I think reality is a hybrid of the two, because these clusters for doing all of this data analytics probably won't run on the switches, but you can certainly have the agents in that distributed system sort of run that local translation, as you said. There's tools like I think Logstash has the ability to do certain things like date time manipulations, recognizing just like raw strings of date times and translating that to something meaningful and standardized. Maybe that stuff can be distributed. Again, I don't know if it would happen on the network switch, but these things, I think the telemetry future is absolutely distributed. There's no realistic way to do this in one VM or box or whatever.
Well, I think what the telemetry data is going to wind up in a data sink somewhere. Because we've already solved that problem, sort of. And so what you're going to get is you're just going to get raw data, a pool of it. And then when I need to go out and find something, we're going to use analytics tools that we've already built for other analysis and be able to pull that data out. So it's not necessarily I'm worried about overwhelming it as much as I would be what happens when that data lake goes stagnant, or you start running into problems where bad data gets in there and then it throws everything else off. Because now the problem is that we finally got the data we wanted, and now we have data problems.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is when you start using telemetry, what are the ramifications to an organization? So you already mentioned potentially having a separate telemetry network, but again, storage, where are we going to put all this data that we're getting, and what other ramifications are out there once you start grabbing all of this information from all of your gear that's in your
The DevOps team is going to handle it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, because one good thing about SNMP is if you don't pull the data, it just goes away.
Right.
But with telemetry, you're kind of stuck. You're drinking from the fire hose, and if you don't collect that data, it does go away, and you can't get it back. So
I mean, that's another trade-off you might have to make, right? Like if you just want everything, you might not realistically be able to get everything. And so you either filter, or you are okay with a huge delay as you queue it up to maybe slower but larger capacity drives. I mean, these things are all usually about trade-offs, so I just think it depends on what you want.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for this discussion on network telemetry from Intel Cloud Day. You can find videos like this on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/techfieldday, or you can just Google Tech Field Day, networking, and your favorite topics.